Charles Wesley Lovatt was born on the farm in Hayfield, Manitoba. He was one of 5 boys. It was January the 8th, 1916, while studying in Winnipeg, that Charlie decided to enlist in the Canadian Army Medical Corps to represent his country in World War I. May 27, 1916, Charlie transferred to the 179th Battalion and attended Camp Hughes, just outside of Carberry, Manitoba, for training. He trained until September 27th, when his order came in to head overseas. Charlie rode the train from Winnipeg to Halifax, where on October 3, 1916, he boarded the SX Saxonia and set sail for Liverpool, England. Ten days later, he landed. It was now October 13th. He spent the next 2 months training at the Canadian Army Medical Corps camp. In that time, he connected with family in and around London, taking these photos. While in London training, Charlie purchased this diary. From Vimy Ridge to the Battle of Passchendaele, where he was killed in action, Charlie was in the 1st Ambulance Battalion. Charlie died while stretchering a fellow soldier on the battlefield, October 29th, 1917. These are Charlie's words during World War I.
I entrained at Shorncliffe at 9 a.m. with a draft of 32 for France and arrived at Southampton at 4 in the afternoon. Once on board the ship, we waited until midnight to weigh anchor. It's a beautiful night with the harbor lit up very prettily until lights out, December 30th. I was seasick in transit and relieved when we arrived at Le Havre at 5 a.m. We embarked at 8 and marched 7 miles to the Canadian base depot at Routledge. It's very muddy and the children very dirty and begging for biscuits or selling confectionery items. We arrived at camp around 11 and were quartered in tents, lots of mud. There are a great number of troops in the camp, and an Imperial camp close by is similarly vast. We sleep 11 to a tent and have to stand in line 200 yards long for our meals. The food is terribly plain but substantial, December 31st. We were each paid 25 francs and then given a medical inspection, after which we fell in at 6 p.m. and were addressed by the chaplain before marching back to Le Havre. There we entrained at around 9. It was very crowded by the time we pulled out of the station at 2 in the morning. It was another beautiful moonlit night, January 4th. Traveling was very slow with frequent stops, and we arrived at Rouen at daybreak. We had breakfast in a rest camp and waited there until 2 p.m. before slowly setting off up the line. It took the rest of that day and all night. There was bright moonlight at first, but then the rain came on, so we were very miserable at daybreak. We continued up the line until arriving at Aubigny, January 5th. We marched to the administration headquarters at 2 p.m., where I was posted to the 12th Field Ambulance. I was able to take the 3 kilometers there by motor lorry. The 78th Battalion is in the district and suffered heavily a few days ago, January 6th. The villages show little signs of bombardment, but nonetheless there aren't many civilians around. Our camp is located 7 miles west of the trenches. The remainder of the month consists mainly of road repair, gas guard duty, and construction of camps for newly arriving troops. I met several Winnipeg boys in camp. Part of the corps is in the trenches and the rest run the hospital. There's lots of rain and mud everywhere. We can hear the explosions on the front from here. There was church communion and a parade today at 2 p.m. The chaplain spoke to the troops. We moved to a Blanc Saint-Nazaire. I'm on guard duty in a dugout on the hillside, February 4th. My stretcher squad passed through Souchez and spent the day at a regimental aid post in a dugout just below the Pimple. Later I came back to Blanc-Saint-Nazaire with 2 stretcher cases, February 5th. We're on wood fatigue up by the old church ruins. There's considerable artillery fire. I'm on gas guard duty at night, cold and wet, February 7th. I went to the regimental aid post. There was heavy artillery fire by our side around 9 p.m., February 10th. We spent the day in a dugout. The enemy was very quiet until we were on our way home. Then they opened up and gave us a pretty warm time of it. Thankfully, however, there were very few casualties, February 11th. There was a big bombing raid by the 46th Battalion last night. 80 of us stretcher bearers went up to the big dugout in the quarry at 9 p.m. We waited in the dugout doing our best to ignore the cold until a few minutes past 4 a.m. when the casualties began coming in, including several Germans. We carried about 20 stretcher cases and there were about 25 walking cases as well. It was almost noon before things settled down again, February 12th. We had wood fatigue in the afternoon. There's a heavy bombardment to my left. Enemy shells are falling near the church at night, February 14th. We pulled out of the regimental aid post and visited a German cemetery near the dressing station. Most of the graves bore the dates of March and April 1915. A cross raised by the English read, "Forgive us our trespasses." After that, it was back to the regimental aid post, where I was not relieved until 11 that night. It was raining on the way back to camp. I'm on sanitation and gas guard duty for the next several days, February 16th. For the next few weeks, we're putting up isolation tents, having gas mask drills and instructions, and doing plenty of camp maintenance. I'm on gas guard duty at night as well as main dressing station duty. Several battalions are moving into the area. At 4:45 p.m., we're warned that we were going up the line. We fell in at 5 and marched to Carency, then to Hospital Corner. Then after an hour's rest, it was on to Cabaret Rouge, March 15th. At 3 a.m., we went through the tunnel to the regimental aid post. We waited in the entrance to the mine shaft until after the raid, which began at 4 a.m. We carried out 8 stretcher cases overland to Cabaret Rouge and loaded them onto trucks bound for Hospital Corner, then back to Cabaret Rouge for breakfast at 9:30 a.m. After that, we were able to rest for the remainder of the day, March 16th. I was on guard duty in the morning and attended a church parade in the afternoon. Services were held in the evening. But there's encouraging news of a British success at Bethune, March 18th. I've been on guard duty for the last 4 days and still have 2 days to go. It's been very windy and wet and looks like it's going to continue. There are rumors of a British success at the Somme, March 21st. We were carrying stretcher cases to Hospital Corner during the day with a heavy German bombardment at about 2 in the afternoon. Our squads were unable to carry on for some time. After dark, a large party of us went up the line, but were not very busy, March 28th. There is heavy fighting today on both sides. We were carrying wounded to Hospital Corner at night, March 30th. We were off duty until this afternoon and took advantage of the opportunity to rest. Then we all went up to the regimental aid post for the raid, which came off at 11:20 in the evening. With 5 squads, we carried about 8 stretcher cases and 20 walking cases, March 31st. I'm in the tunnels. There are reports of heavy casualties in the Cabaret Trench, and there's been a heavy artillery duel all week. The trenches are very wet. Fritz is still shelling heavily. We've taken trips to both Blue Bull and Gobron tunnels. April 5th. There's still heavy shelling in the valley, and the squads have been busy. A and C sections came up for the big raid tomorrow, April 8th. We tried to get up to the regimental aid post at about 5 a.m. but failed on account of heavy shelling. Our barrage began at 5:30 and our troops made splendid advancement. They took about 4,600 prisoners, April 9th. Wounded have been coming in all day and Earl Hembroff was killed. We searched for the wounded at night and sleep for most of the day. The 10th Brigade advanced and completed the taking of Vimy Ridge, April 10th. It's very quiet at our regimental aid post. Our troops continue to push on. Wounded are taken out by railway trolley from Dingwall Tunnel. Heavy snow today, April 11th. Givenchy has been taken. Most of us from Cabaret Rouge returned to Gouy-Servant. We were cleaning up around the main dressing station and building new huts. Most of the boys returned from the line. A strong British attack on this front was very successful. We handled the walking wounded and sent them to the casualty clearing station on lorries. Very busy. Then we went to Lozingen Casualty Clearing Station, April 24th. There was a successful raid by the 25th Battalion. A. Stewart and R. Gray passed through the dressing station. That was very fine. April 28th. We went to Souchez at 8 in the morning. In the afternoon, we went over the ridge to the old trenches. They are overflowing dugouts now. We took 12 stretcher cases to Hospital Corner in the evening and again after dark, May 19th. I spent the evening with Cousin Joe Lovatt in Souchez. Fritz shelled the valley near us during the night. We had 4 stretcher cases. One died later, May 30th. A sergeant of a local battery was killed. I received a parcel of goods from Uncle Joe and acknowledged them, June 1st. Fritz sent quite a number of shells our way last night. When our barrage opened up for the raid, we obtained a good view of a very spectacular scene. We handled 71 walking wounded from 3:30 a.m. to 9. The success of the raid is doubtful though, and there's heavy shelling around our dressing station, June 4th. Not much doing today. A few gas cases came in. Henderson and I went to Hospital Corner with an urgent case at 6:30 in the evening, June 7th. We closed the dressing station in the Dingwall Tunnel and took the trucks to Angres before returning to Hospital Corner. I went with Corporal Magwood onto Vimy Ridge to look for Halliday's grave. One of our balloons escaped, June 13th. The remainder of June and July consists of stretcher duty and dressing station work, and there were also a few visits from Cousin Joe. It's August now. We are working on a new dressing station near Souchez. There's been heavy shelling all day in Angres and up the line all night, August 26th. And now it's September. There's still heavy shelling on the road to Angres. We tried to make the trip with stretcher cases, but were driven back. We made it later with 4 bearers, September 13th. The shelling on the road to Angres continues. I went with Sid Cook to Burke's Hole, September 15th. Today I learned from the 54th Battalion of Cousin Joe's death. He's buried in plot B1 at Aix-Noulette. I made arrangements to have a cross erected on his grave, September 21st. There was a heavy bombardment all day, so we waited until nightfall to move up the line. I became sick en route. Very cold, September 30th. I have just returned to duty after 6 days of illness. The first ambulance has taken over the advance posts. We moved to Hospital Corner at 8 in the morning, raining and cold, October 6th. On the move, reveille was at 3:30 a.m., breakfast at 4. We entrained at Houdain around 9 and traveled to Tienay. We marched from there for about 15 kilometers to a farm building just outside Cassel. I'm pretty tired. It's raining, so we billeted in an old barn, October 13th. We're preparing to move again. We reveilled at 3:30, fell in at 5:30 and marched to the crossroads, then rode in trucks to Hillowhook, where we took over the Corps rest station from the field ambulance of the East Lancashires. Rainy and wet, but I was able to take a bath nonetheless, October 22nd. Passchendaele. We took trucks via Polpringe to Ypres in Belgium. In the evening, we went up the line via White Chateau and took over posts from the 11th Battalion with a squad of 8 in the regimental aid post near Polygon Wood, October 23rd. We billeted under a tarp on the shelter side of a pillbox and spent an uncomfortable night as the shelling was constant throughout. Quarters were cramped and wet. Not many cases, but shelling was heavy on both sides, so much so that a squad was forced out of its post at Hollebeck, October 24th. There was a very heavy bombardment during the night and high winds wrecked our quarters. We got very little sleep until relieved by the 13th Battalion. We returned to Ypres and were billeted in an old prison. The remainder of the 13th is coming up the line, October 25th. We are resting during the day. The 46th Battalion went over and made their objective, but had to retreat with numerous casualties. We left Ypres at 11 p.m. and proceeded via truck to Frosthouse and from there to Zernebeke. My squad is broken. Other squads were sent up to the 46th Regimental Aid Post. I made the trip with walking cases and then 3 more trips to the Regimental Aid Post, then back to Ypres at night, October 27th.